Hi everybody. I hope everyone can hear me. Yeah, I'm getting some nods here, so it's good. Welcome to our Jigsaw Connect webinar series for teachers in collaboration with ESCI. I'm delighted to join you here today with our panel members. So myself, I'm Michelle. I'm a Jigsaw clinician. I'm joined by my colleague Erica Lawless, who's also a Jigsaw clinician. We're joined by two other panel members, Mary Hawk, who is educational consultant, mediator, and restorative practice practitioner, and Philip Brady, post-primary school teacher, care team member and counsellor. So I suppose for today's webinar, we're going to talk about the topic of self-care. And just to run you through some of the format of the webinar today, myself and Erica are going to first give you guys some context around self-care and introduce some elements of self-care practice that we feel are important for everyone to be considering at this time. We're then going to open up to a panel discussion. So we're going to invite Mary and Philip to maybe share some of their reflections and their experience coming from the education setting. And then we'll have a wider Q&A session for our last 15 minutes of the webinar today. So just on that, we've had quite a lot of interest in this webinar today. We have a lot of numbers attending here today. So we're going to try our very best to get to as many questions as we can within the time that we have available. But just so you guys know, we will have a record of all questions that do come in. So any questions that we maybe don't get to today, we will try our best to get to them maybe in another webinar or perhaps on our Jigsaw online platform as well. Okay, so I might get started then today with something that might seem quite obvious to us all, and that is that we are human first. And I think, there's a real clear reason why we decided to start this webinar series for teachers with the topic of self-care. And it really was for the purpose of connecting with ourselves first before we connect with anything else. So some of us are teachers, yes, but some of us are mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, colleagues, neighbours, friends, and we're all experiencing the current situation and the stress of the current situation as humans first, among our many roles that we have. So I think it's really important that we connect with that and that common humanity that we're all experiencing at the moment. Before, I suppose, we think about anything else that we might need to do is just connect in with that human side that we are all bringing here today.
So the importance of self-care. Self-care is essential to promote our own mental health and sense of well-being. It has a preventative focus, so engaging in self-care practices proactively enhance our health by building resilience and preventing ill health. Here we have the analogy of the oxygen mask. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the advice that you need to put on your own oxygen mask first before being able to help another put on theirs. And likewise, you need to look after yourself first before being able to support another person. And we realise the vital role the teachers play in the lives of their students. And we know that you're much more effective in supporting your students if you look after yourself first. And I suppose now more than ever during this time of remote working, self-care is really relevant. There's quite a lot of acknowledgement around, I suppose, the current stress that leaving certs and exam students in particular are facing right now. And you not only have to support them, but you also have to adjust to a whole new kind of way of working, managing your own kind of personal lives while working from home, and also managing the typical worries to do with everything going on in the world right now. But yeah, during this time, I suppose it's particularly important that teachers pay attention to taking proactive steps to looking after their own self-care and well-being. Self-care is essential, I suppose, for giving us the foundations for being able to deal with everyday challenges and stressors that come our way, and I'll chat a bit more about that later.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, Erica touched on that already around the current expectations of teachers at the moment. And I think this pencil and the bendiness of this pencil could go on and on in terms of kind of maybe the bends and twists and the flexibilities and the adaptations that that teachers are maybe expected to do and are currently doing at the moment. I heard someone saying we literally have transformed your roles and how you work literally overnight. You got a call from the department to close schools, and 3 hours later that was it, and there was a massive unknown and uncertainty about what was to come. School closures have happened before in the context of snow days or heating issues, but never in the context of what we're facing right now, and with so much uncertainty. And I think it's fair to say that teachers have really risen to the challenge of what's been expected of them. And I think it's really clear to see that the value of teachers are being really seen right now from everybody. I think parents especially probably as well as students, and fellow teachers as well, and your colleagues obviously. But the expectations are really of high flexibility and high adaptability, and just to acknowledge that means we're operating well and truly outside of our comfort zones at the moment. So in terms of looking after ourselves has never been so important as a time when we're really operating in a really foreign space where all of the knowns and the familiars and the certainties are out the window at the moment, and we're really navigating an unfamiliar space right now. So just to acknowledge that you're stretched. I think you probably are all feeling that right now in a lot of ways, and even more so than just in your professional roles, in every aspect of it as well. So just to kind of validate that first and foremost. We want to introduce maybe some elements of self-care now, and we just really, for those of you who might be familiar with Jigsaw's way of work and our self-care workshop in particular, we talk a lot about elements of self-care. So what we've done for today's webinar is just extract maybe 4 key elements of self-care, which we just wanted to put some attention on for now in the current situation that we're all facing. And the first element of self-care that I just want to introduce is that one around awareness. And that really one around self-awareness, and just acknowledging the presence of stress as a normal and valid response to what we're all experiencing. It's a shared experience, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with stress. It's a very normal response right now. And to maybe just pay attention to how your body is communicating that stress response. Are you somebody who is speeding up at the moment, or are you someone who's shutting down? And we all have different stress responses. We can be quite individual in our stress responses. And some of us feel it quite physically in terms of tension, pain, headaches. And some of us might notice it in terms of our behaviors, and our appetite changes, our energy levels, things that we want to do and don't want to do, or our mind, and maybe that kind of worry or that kind of tension and things like that we can experience at that level in lots of individual ways. So maybe tuning into how your own body is communicating to you right now in terms of your own stress response. We can acknowledge that we are facing quite a significant external stressor, which is the COVID-19 situation happening in the world right now globally. There's lots of external sources of stress that are possible that can really impact us, but there's also internal sources of stress. And what I mean by that is those kind of, I suppose, internal sources such as thoughts, such as those kind of stories, how we maybe perceive certain situations that can actually, in a lot of circumstances, exacerbate the stress response. I don't know about you, but for me anyway, certainly I'm constantly experiencing that I'm not doing enough story. I should be doing more story. There's so many things I could be doing right now. Why aren't I doing them? Look at this person over there doing this and they're coping great, and what's wrong with me? These are all internal sources of stress that we can all experience in different ways. And it's important for us to maybe acknowledge that while yes, we have a massive external source of stress in the world right now, some of these internal sources of stress are really not helping us either. And so just paying attention to those and recognizing them for what they are, and maybe being able to kind of take some space from those internal sources right now, because they're really not helpful. And there's one little exercise that I have today, because I know it's a webinar where we're kind of talking quite a lot, but I just wanted to introduce maybe just one little practical exercise that we use quite regularly, really with young people that I work with in Jigsaw, but myself as well, and in workshops that I do. And it's a grounding exercise called dropping your anchor. And it's based on the acronym of ACE, A-C-E. So A really stands for just acknowledging the presence of thoughts and feelings. So not trying to struggle with them or push them away, but just taking a moment, and you might even just do it now, just to acknowledge what's going on up there. This never stops. Our minds never stop. They don't take a break at all. So our thoughts are ongoing. So can we just take a moment, maybe just to acknowledge what's actually happening right now? Watch out for common mind traps, distractions that might be going on. I'm not going to try to change them, we're just noticing them right now. And once we've noticed them, then we're going to just take some time to come back into our body. If this is going on, we're not pushing it away, but we're going to take some time to come back into our body. And we can do that through various ways. Some of us might push our feet into the floor. We might be sitting down right now, so we might actually push our back into the chair. We might even take a gentle stretch. Just come back into our physical bodies. So our mind might have carried us away, but we have our physical body, and our body is always present in the here and now. And a key regulator for that is our breath, and that's always with us. So we can notice our breath and notice our breathing, and maybe even just take a few breaths in through our nose and out through our mouths. So acknowledging the thoughts, coming back into our bodies. And E for engage in the world around you. So bring our awareness back to where we are. You're at a webinar, you're looking at screens, faces on screens and little boxes. We're getting very familiar with this right now. You know, you might be in a room. What are you doing right now? So bring yourself back to where you are right now and what you're actually doing. So our mind might be somewhere a million miles away. So this little exercise just acknowledges this, brings us back into the moment of where we're at right now. And we can do this. There's no kind of, I suppose, rule on how to practice ACE or when to practice it. We can do it many times. You know, some of the teachers in the workshops we would have done before, we talk about using maybe dropping our anchor at the start of lessons. When you're rushing from one class to another, we're not in the classroom anymore, but there's no reason why we can't maybe introduce a little bit of ACE into our daily lives in lots of different ways as well. So we'll go on to the second element of self-care now, and that's around really foundations and looking after the foundations.
Yeah, so looking after the foundations of, I suppose it's, you know, we need to look after our foundations in order to build our capacity to be able to deal with stress by looking after the foundational areas of self-care, so such as the basics of sleep, nutrition, physical activity. Self-care, it's not the same as stress management. However, self-care is essential for stress management. And like the tree there, a tree will be much better equipped to weather storms and deal with harsh weather conditions if it has strong roots. And with humans, it's the self-care that strengthens our roots. So when it comes to mental health and well-being, and it is inevitable that we will face, you know, challenges and stressors and really hard times as we are doing now. But if we do continue to engage in the basic self-care practices and look after our foundations, we will be that bit better equipped to deal with those stressors when we are faced with them. So the next point, do what works for you. So self-care is very individual. There certainly are common practices that are common to all humans, such as sleep and diet and exercise. And these basic practices, you know, are possibly the most important. But there are other self-care activities that are very unique to each person. And yeah, I suppose it's important to know that you don't have to be doing the same as, you know, what your peer or colleague is doing. It really is kind of tuning into your body and mind and what you need. And with self-care, it's important to be willing to be flexible. So I suppose what is self-care one week might not be self-care another week. So again, tuning into your body and kind of understanding what you need. Sometimes self-care is just resting and relaxing. Other times it might be moving and physical activity. Sometimes, you know, you might need to socialize and to connect and meet people to look after yourself. But other times it might be that you need just, you know, some quiet time on your own. So again, it all comes down to kind of tuning into what you need. And lastly, be kind to yourself. So I suppose with self-care, self-compassion is a vital element. And again, trying not to kind of be hard on yourself or compare to others, thinking that you should be doing this and you should be doing that, and feeling guilty maybe for not engaging in certain self-care practices. So being kind to yourself is a really important part as well.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose I can relate to a lot of those, and I suppose what we talk about self-care is self-care is designed to nourish us. So if self-care is becoming one of those other things that you feel like you have to do or should do, it's not really having that nourishing impact. So it might need a little bit of readjustment in terms of what you're talking about as self-care. So what was self-care maybe before, when you were, I suppose, working in the classroom or in the school environment, and that yoga class was providing lots of self-care. Right now it might feel like a little bit of a burden and may not be providing that nourishing impact because lots of other things have happened. So that flexibility and that, I suppose, revisiting of what is self-care and the nourishing aspect of what self-care is intended to do, and maybe letting go of the shoulds and the must-dos, and tuning back into what it is actually that works for you. Yeah. The third element of self-care, and I suppose it's important very much in the classroom context, but probably now more than ever, is this concept of boundaries. And we really wanted to highlight the importance of just respecting and recognizing your own needs and your own wishes right now in your virtual role or online kind of role or online way of working. I suppose it's really important to have a work schedule kind of consideration and thinking about how you're going to set that up for yourself. I know initially there was that knee-jerk reaction when this all kind of kicked off around I must be available to all people at all times. And I know, I suppose, from talking to colleagues and to friends who work in a teacher role, I suppose suddenly the workday extended massively for a lot of teachers, and it became something that didn't seem to have clear boundaries about kind of the start time and finish time. So really kind of putting clear parameters in on your availability now that we're, I suppose, becoming a little bit more accustomed to this way of working, I suppose, starting to really work out for what works for you and having that start time and that end time, and making that quite clear to all people that you might be working with, so to students and parents, in terms of recognizing when you're on and when you're not available, but also to colleagues and to maybe managers or principals in terms of when you're going to be expected to be available to respond to emails or to meetings, and being able to kind of outline when you actually may not be available as well. I know a colleague of mine mentioned that, I suppose, about having some kind of break time, that, you know, when you move from class to class, there is naturally a little break between classes, sitting at a desk and moving from class to class without any movement or any kind of, I suppose, moment to take a little bit of a stretch break really is quite unhealthy. So it's about kind of recognizing that we might need to revisit what was traditional routines and establish a new way of working that works for everybody as well. A little bit again on boundaries is just around kind of, suppose, being contactable, and obviously that's something that teachers want to be to their students, but I suppose having kind of just practical elements of having a dedicated work email created if it's not already created. I suppose now is not a time to be sharing personal emails, but having obviously a work account that's created specifically for this purpose, and only checking those emails when you are designated to the working role. So avoiding checking that or responding to emails outside of that. Just for your own self-care practice, this is really, really important that you have a switch off time. And those emails are not going anywhere, and they will be there again when you return to work the next day. So it's about kind of just recognizing that and just getting into the practice of establishing those boundaries, which can be hard to do. It's easier said than done, no doubt, and oftentimes we learn through trial and error. But I suppose it's about kind of getting clear on the importance of this for you guys right now. And our last element of self-care then is topic of support.
Yeah, seeking and availing of support from others is a really essential element of self-care. We can have lots of personal, individual self-care practices in place, but there are times when we do need that social connection or peer support, or even availing of external supports. Peer support in particular is really valuable. I have heard that teachers often report that the support they get from their colleagues can often be the most valuable. So it's having a colleague who can kind of relate to what you're going through, or even, you know, after a really difficult class, kind of having a debrief in the staff room over a cup of tea. But remote working can obviously pose challenges to that. So I suppose people need to kind of try and think up of alternative ways of getting that connection from their colleagues or from their school community, whether it's virtual team meetings or even kind of virtual tea breaks that maybe aren't just to do with talking about work, that even just, you know, meeting on an online platform and just kind of seeing all your colleagues' faces is kind of important. Working from home, I suppose, can be quite isolating, and it is such a contrast from what we're used to. I suppose sometimes, yeah, we can be doing all the right things as well, but there are times when some of us will need more kind of specialised external support for mental health and well-being. I suppose, like physical health, you can be doing all the right things, exercising and taking rests, but often you still will need to go for kind of more specialised support for physical health. So similarly with your mental health, and we have the supports there. Sorry, I'm just trying to zoom in. Yeah, so we have, I'm sure you're aware of many of the supports that are available to teachers, the EAP, Employee Assistance and Wellbeing Service, so there's a helpline there and an email address. you know, platforms like this, like the Jigsaw Connect series. I know the PDST has wellbeing resources as well. So there are kind of a lot of different resources and options for teachers. So it's just about kind of seeking them out and availing of them.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
So thank you very much. And we are going to open it up now to a panel discussion. So I'm going to start with, Mary, I might start with a question for yourself. We talked here about the various elements of self-care, and one of those that was important, one of those was the importance of boundaries. Mary, what do you feel are some of the current challenges with boundaries faced by teachers, and have you any kind of suggestions or recommendations on how to manage these?
Okay, I suppose, you know, from my years of experience of working with schools in the whole area of well-being and, you know, social personal health education, I would have found that teachers of their very nature, they're a very caring, nurturing profession, and they're always looking out for the well-being of their students. And one of the difficulties they would have struggled with anyway, even in the classroom and in the school environment, was that whole idea of what can I do and how far can I go, and what about those children that might be more vulnerable than other children, and you know, that whole idea of, well, you can't go home with them, okay, and I can't fix everything, right? So boundaries was always, I suppose, a challenge for people to say, there's only so much I can do, okay? Now I think in this very unusual situation that we find ourselves in, and let's be totally honest about it, it's a completely artificial situation at the minute. This is not how any of us would choose to be teaching children or teaching people. It's not the way that we would normally interact. Teaching is very much about relationship building, and it's very much about being present with the young people, responding to their needs, seeing where they're at. When we're working in this virtual world now, as we are with young people, some schools and teachers are connecting through emails, others are trying to do some live work with young people as well, but it's still a very artificial environment. We have to accept the fact that there are real boundaries to what we can and can't do. It's not, we can't duplicate teaching as we'd like to. If we could, we'd be doing this all the time. We can't. So I suppose that's the first thing we've got to accept, is that there's a real limit and a boundary to what we can actually achieve and what we can actually do. But the bigger issue I find, and I suppose I have lots of schools that I'm working with and trying to support, but also colleagues, friends of mine who are principals and teachers in all types of different schools, and I also have personal family members who are teachers. And I suppose what they're telling me at the minute is that that whole issue of the working day not having a definite start and a finish, and definitely bad habits creeping in around trying to meet the needs of everybody all the time. So like I heard a story even yesterday of, you know, somebody sending information at 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, that sort of stuff. So I suppose it's something that we have to, if we're going to talk about looking after self-care and we're going to look after minding ourselves, and we know you've mentioned, Eric and Michelle, there about the, you know, the foundations of self-care, how essential sleep is, how essential it is to mind ourselves. We have to really say, well, we've got to try and structure, when am I starting, when am I finishing? And everybody's different, and every situation, and every teacher in the country at the minute is living in a home that is very different to what it was a few weeks ago. You know, there are some people who are trying to parent their own children while still engaging in work. They may have very small children, they may be trying to look after an elderly parent. They might be very worried about somebody who's actually has the illness. There's all sorts of things going on. So I suppose, I think it's never been more important to try and look at these boundaries. And I suppose what I would suggest to people is to try at least to say, right, a timetable of when I'm available, when I'm not available, and try and stick to it, and try and be really, really, you know, I know we've talked about flexibility, but try as much as possible to keep weekends. You know, I had people who said to me, I don't know whether it's Friday or Saturday, and I'm still responding and sending stuff on Sunday. And, you know, try and say, no, no, I'm not working. This is my working week. This is my working day. I even had to, give some advice. I'm a chairperson of a post-primary school myself, and I was trying to even advise, somebody around the fact that the Easter holidays were the Easter holidays, because there was nearly one day at the moment is nearly gone into another. People are saying, I don't know what day of the week it is. So it's a very artificial time at the moment. There's an awful lot of things happening, and I just think boundaries we have to really, really try and stick to them.
Definitely, and I think it's probably coming from place, Mary, of everyone is trying to do their best, isn't it? And kind of give as much of themselves as coming
Yes.
from the best place possible. But like that, in order to be able to give our best, I suppose it is about revisiting what our capacity is as well, and looking after that, and recognizing the importance of that. And that's not an excuse or a get out. That's actually the foundation for everything you do, is looking after that ability to be able to continue to sustain, I suppose, giving your best in doing what you do as a teacher.
And just one further thing I would say to people, you mentioned mind traps there, Michelle, right? One of the biggest issues I find at the minute is teachers are very self-critical, and the big worry they always have is, I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing enough. To try and relax a little bit and say, look, I can only do so much at the minute. I'm doing the best I can, and not compare yourself to a colleague in the same school or a colleague in a school down the road, because that's another one. Oh, jeepers, they're doing this and we're only doing that. Try and stay away from that if possible. It's hard to do it. I know it's hard to do, but try and stay away from those sort of mind traps.
Yeah, exactly. Great. And I suppose, Philip, just to bring you in, I suppose another element of self-care that we talked about was this concept of support and the importance of support for teachers. And just from your experience, do you have any suggestions about how support may be fostered for teachers during this time, or have you any direct experience of maybe things that you're doing to support yourself and other teachers during this time?
Yes. Well, Michelle, I think a very important change for us in our school is the immediacy of having to get out of technophobia. I mean, I wouldn't have been a great promoter of too much online stuff, but one thing that I always wanted to have was a connection with the students, as a group, so I could send them an email or whatever, and we could never seem to get it together. But as soon as this shutdown of schools came about, I'm able to just send an email to all the students at once. So that's a really positive effect. And I have to thank the principal for that. And I think in general, we can only rely on the skills that are offered by, people like yourselves who can give the support emotionally to the teachers, but we also need that technical support. Like, I'm able to communicate with students online because the very day after the schools closed, we were set up with Zoom and I could use it. So that's one very important support. And I think it really does get me to connect more with my colleagues and really value what they have to offer, like the teachers in the school who are able to answer my questions around the technology. And I think this is the difficulty, as Mary pointed out, we're so much in the caring role as teachers that we find it difficult to be in the receiving role. And we always know that. I know even from counseling with couples, one of the major difficulties is that they want to give, but they find it hard to receive. And if you don't receive, then what are all the givers going to do? We can't all be givers. Somebody needs to take. So I think it's a great time now for teachers to ask and not to be embarrassed about having difficulties with the small difficulties. I know so often, even in a classroom situation myself, when I don't follow what the teacher is saying or in the past, and I'd be afraid to ask. But then somebody else would ask the very question that I wanted to be asked. But it's like what Carl Rogers, the psychotherapist, said, that what's most personal is most general. What we think is unique to us, or a problem that everybody else will think is weird, actually you'll find that nearly everybody's having the same problem. And one thing that this virus has given us, and I don't want to reject the gravity of the situation, and many like colleagues of mine, teachers, have lost their lives in this. So even for teachers to be aware that there are great teachers of the past now who have been affected by this and lost loved ones, or have lost their own lives. So I just want to acknowledge that. But having said that, there is so much positive outcomes from it, that we can take from it. And one of those is to be able to ask and to see the value of reaching out. Like sorry, just one final thing. I probably would have more contact with my colleagues now than I would have sometimes, because I'm rushing around, the school. And I know that is a very useful thing to be able to, as you said, I think it was Erica, or maybe yourself, Michelle, one of your teaching friends, said that they miss that, being able to go. And I agree with that. But sometimes that also has you in that head spin. And now when I stop, a class or whatever I'm doing online, I'm not rushing around. I can have time maybe to communicate with somebody or attend to a conversation with a teacher online. Sorry, Michelle. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's just interesting because I suppose we're maybe, I suppose, our natural defect is to think about, the challenges and the negatives of a situation of this. But I suppose what you've raised there, Philip, is there's been opportunities, and there's maybe been some surprises of things that maybe you hadn't anticipated, even in terms of maybe your access to colleagues, maybe
Yes.
that idea that the time has slowed down a little bit, and for some of us now, again, not for all of us, but for some of us, maybe it has afforded some opportunities to slow down a little bit and maybe to appreciate some of those things that maybe we were missing before. And I suppose you mentioned in terms of support there, in terms of kind of practical support. So actually the know-how, the skills, some of us technology comes easy. I'm not one of those. So for some of us, we might need a bit of support. So not being afraid maybe to ask for that kind of support that we might need. This is all new for a lot of us. So I suppose we're all in this together, like what you said as well. It's sometimes we're embarrassed or ashamed, thinking I'm the only one. I don't want to admit I'm struggling with this. We open it out and suddenly we realize, actually, God, I've asked the question that everybody was just waiting for somebody to ask. So there's a real kind of practical sense of support there. In terms of social support, then you touched on a bit of that then as well, Philip, around it was being available to colleagues. Are you guys having kind of social kind of support opportunities as well?
And that's where I can appreciate my colleagues more, because a lot of the times now my family are older. My sons are older now, but I remember some of my colleagues would organize socials and I couldn't go to them because, I had to take my children home or whatever. But that's funny. One of the teachers who is very good at organizing the socials came up with the idea of having a social on a Friday, a social Friday. So at the time when they would normally meet in a local pub or whatever, now we would meet online with a drink, alcoholic or non-alcoholic, and no talk of school. So we had that there a week or two ago, and it was so nice just to be able to do that. And again, I didn't have to go anywhere, but the fact that I could see all my colleagues in that situation, it's very, very supportive. And I think it is a kind of a leveler in some ways, this whole situation. It really helps us to see that common thread in all of us, everybody. I know I used to envy, I'm ashamed to admit this really, I used to envy the teachers who'd be going abroad to all these wonderful places, and I wouldn't be going. And now we're all at home, so even that can be, but we're all in the same situation. We can connect with each other in that way. But anyway, so that's a great social aspect to the situation, where we can connect with each other on a Friday evening after our own, day at home.
And it's great to hear that, you have been availing of that support, and it sounds like within your school community, the support is there, and that you have been making efforts to connect virtually, which is really positive. But yeah, no doubt, I'm sure there are a lot of people that find adapting to this new way of working quite difficult. So that was a really good point, I suppose, not being afraid to ask colleagues for support, or, just ask for help. I just want to remind people that you can ask questions, so that you can send questions in and we'll be answering them. So I suppose while we might wait on a few questions, I have just another question here that I might just put to yourself, Mary, if that's okay. One of the challenges of engaging in self-care, particularly in the current situation, is time and being able to balance self-care along with all of the other roles that you have, so workload, home life, etc. All those roles being juggled. So do you have any suggestions for teachers who might be struggling to find time for self-care at the moment, and how to balance it with all the other roles?
Yeah, I think what was nice, what you mentioned earlier was, I suppose, that, you know, maybe what we used to do for self-care, you know, isn't possible anymore. You know, I'm just thinking about things like, say, in my own case, where family members would have gone to, you know, Pilates classes, yoga classes, etc., and they'd have had childminding arranged maybe for them to do that. Now none of that's possible anymore, so they've got to try and find another way of doing it. Now what they've done is, again, been very inventive and found the Pilates online or their yoga online, and they're able to do it. And, you know, but I think it's about, again, trying to find out, first of all, what's going to work for you at the minute, what's doable, that doesn't become a chore, that isn't, you know, suddenly what you love to do for self-care, now it's suddenly like, oh God, I have to do it, and that's not working anymore. So maybe, again, it's about, like for me at the minute, right, I decided I was going to do up my garden. I haven't given any care to my garden for years, and I used to have two big Labradors who used to make sure that I couldn't do much in the garden because they'd rip up everything I did. But it was just one of the things I took on board, and I decided I was going to do a little bit of planting of plants and bird feeding and all the rest of it. And now one of my big elements of self-care is just taking a couple of minutes when I can and sit outside this lovely weather we're having, thankfully, and listen to the birds singing and watch them feeding. And it's just lovely. And it's something that I've discovered that it's wow. And it's meeting that need for me to connect to, you know, to nature, to ground myself, to, you know, kind of do that bit of anchoring and come back into myself, because I've gone, would you believe, from a house where I was on my own to now there being 5 people working from home here. And it's become very busy and very, you know, a lot of shopping to be done, a lot of meals to be organised, etc. I think if I never cook again after this, I'd be quite happy. But you know, it's just, that's the reality. And so I suppose my suggestion is, there's nothing magical, but it's to try and make sure you find whatever it is for you and just catch it when you can. And I suppose it is about catching it when you can. And I'm very conscious of people that, you know, it's okay if you have support in the house, where you can say to somebody, well, will you do this for a minute while I get that walk in, or I, you know, get that bath in, or I get a chance to sit down with my cup of tea or my glass of wine, or whatever it is that you want to sit down with. Not everybody has it, not everybody. Some people are trying to mind, as I say, small children, multiple people in the house, and they mightn't have that chance. But what I would try and say to people is, it's very important, even if it's only a few minutes every day, catch some time that you get to yourself, and that is just purely about yourself.
Yeah,
I think that's
definitely.
really, you know, really important.
Definitely, Mary. I think that idea that the time sometimes it isn't our own, that we feel like it isn't our own, because maybe there's lots of people that are demanding it right now. So yes, some people maybe are teachers, but they're also trying to juggle being mammies or being daddies and being lots of other things at the moment as well. So time really is can feel like a major challenge or a major barrier. So I suppose maybe it is about revisiting what is self-care for you right now and taking those moments where they do come. I've seen something interesting recently where someone said they actually broke out the good shower gel that they'd been holding up to give to somebody and press it, but you know what, I deserve it. So, you know, things like that is with small gestures of kindness to ourselves in the moments that we do have. It's revisiting what self-care might mean to you right now, and it not becoming something else that's a to-do list or a pressurized task that you feel you should do, but something that nourishes you in the right way right now as well. And definitely on the birds, I feel the birds have come out of nowhere in this virus. All of a sudden, I feel like there's birds everywhere, and they've turned up the volume massively. But it's beautiful, and it takes, you know, I suppose, a few moments every day just to tune into that. When our world is chaotic and there's lots of things going on, there's lots of anchoring moments that we can tap into that don't have to take a lot of time, and that can just happen in the moments of everyday life, I suppose, as well. So I'm just conscious we have a few questions that have come in, so I might just, I suppose, read out the first one here from Ursula. who's talked about, when a student reaches out through email and reports being quite stressed, it can be quite worrying if you don't have access to the same kind of support that you would normally have in school. So I suppose this one is around, and again, it's probably a natural tendency of teachers is to the worry they have for their students and how to maybe support students at the moment. They may be obviously feeling a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety at the moment. I suppose, does anybody want to take that question around, when a student reaches out?
Yeah, I suppose one of the things, and I'll pass it maybe over to Philip now in a minute, but I suppose one of the things I would be saying is it's critically important to link in with your own staff around that. So I suppose that would be the first thing I'd be saying, that, in the same way as if you were in school and you were aware of a young person who was under particular stress and needed some extra support, you'd be bringing that straight away, up your support line in school. Every school would have, a mechanism whereby, who do I go to next with this concern that I have? So I'd be saying, in the same way, I know schools are having staff meetings online with each other, etc. But I suppose one of the critical things would be to make sure that that's reported to the right personnel in the school, and then see, is the school, have they got a mechanism at the minute to be able to remotely support that student? I'm very aware that, say, for example, there are staff around the country in school completion programs who are actually individually linking in with individual students. They're phoning them, they're writing to them, they're sending them postcards, they're using all types of, if the young person isn't responding via email, they're sending snail mail, the old-fashioned, just to give that message to the young people that we're still here, we care about you, and we're connected to you. And I think that's really important, that would still happen as much as it can. But it comes back to the boundaries again, that, there's a certain amount of distress, unfortunately, that we can't take away. We can't, the external stresses are there for everybody, the young people as well as ourselves. And then, of course, there's all the extra worries if they are exam students, etc. But I suppose it's acknowledging it for them, first of all, saying to them, telling them, even just simply acknowledging that it was great that they could say that. I think that's, isn't that wonderful? Isn't it fantastic that a young person was able to say that in an email to the teacher? And then, if there is a support mechanism in the school, that somebody can get back to that young person, see, is there anything? Maybe it's a stress around the work that's been sent to them, or, again, same way as every teacher is coming from a different home environment where there's lots of things going on, every student is similarly. We have students, we're very aware of the fact that we have students who are in home environments where they're very well supported, and there's lots of, support around technology, but around also space, time, etc. There are other students who are living with maybe younger siblings, have a lot of duties and chores to do at home, and maybe aren't as well supported. So the stresses for them might be more. So maybe Philip would like to add to that.
Yes, I agree with what you say, Mary. And I think Ursula's concern is a concern I've seen among some of my colleagues, because, as I said, I'm part of the care team in the school, and we would have had made a connection with, say, the students who would be particularly vulnerable. And some of those vulnerabilities have become even more prominent now that they don't have that regular contact with us. So we do arrange within the school time, again, keeping boundaries, we do arrange that students can meet up with us one-to-one. Obviously, we get parental permission for this if they're under 18, and they can actually just get that opportunity like they would in the normal school day, where they go to meet the counsellor or the guidance counsellor. They could still have that one-to-one contact. So it's about, I suppose, keeping as much consistency as possible for the young person, because there's so much unsurety now and unpredictability. So, like, I had students today, and that's why I'm in. I don't normally dress like this at home, but it's part of keeping boundaries between school and home that I still keep on while I'm doing my school stuff. We're doing online classes. This is the way the students would see me. My first time I did this, I just wore ordinary clothing. And then it struck me, well, that is not the way the students see me. This is the way they see me. So that's why I said I'll keep this consistent for them, as much consistency as possible. And even today, I got talking to a student, and that was one of the things that is a sixth-year student. As well as I thought their major concerns would be about the exams, and they were. But this student has always been very punctual with their homework, very consistently doing their class work and responsible. But even they were saying they're finding it difficult now because they can't see this, boundary between school and home. So that was something, but we were able to talk for a little while together about that. So I think now a lot of I accept that a lot of teachers, maybe Ursula as well, I don't know, may not have that set up yet where you can meet face to face. But
Yeah. But like, I suppose, like what you've touched on there as well, I suppose, Mary, you just kind of talked about the importance of just validating and I suppose acknowledging the fact that the student felt that they could reach out to the teacher was such a significant step. I suppose in Jigsaw we talk a lot about the role of a teacher being one good adult, being that person that are available to students and available to young people, I suppose, when they might need some support. And it may not always be that teacher provides that support, but maybe it's somebody that can listen, and that in itself is a huge source of support. And it might be then that the role of that teacher might be to signpost that young person to the available supports that they could access right now in terms of stress management. So validating right now that yes, it is quite a stress-provoking situation that we're all facing right now, and your feelings are valid, and to normalize those as shared, and then to acknowledge that actually there are support options that are available. So obviously teachers, whether that be that individual teacher or a support system within the school that may be still operating, whether that be a guidance counsellor or another designated support. I'm very aware that every school kind of operates a bit differently in terms of maybe available support systems that they might have right now, whether they're DESH or non-DESH, or where they might be located across the country. But I suppose then outside of the school system, those support services of Jigsaw being a support service that is available to young people right now, and spun out other services that are available through an online capacity. There's lots of platforms right now that are becoming available to young people. So I know as an organisation ourselves, we've had to kind of, I suppose, change the way that we offer support to young people in a big way in quite a short space of time. So just to acknowledge that there are support services that teacher doesn't feel the need to carry. I suppose that worry or that concern on their own, the same way as they wouldn't if they were operating in a face-to-face capacity as well.
And I think that's probably a huge issue that teachers are facing, kind of dealing with anxieties and worries of students. And I suppose to reiterate all the points that you've made, but also when teachers are confronted with that stress and anxiety, sometimes it can lead to heightened stress and anxiety, and it's important for teachers to be able to kind of take a step back and take a breath and kind of check in with themselves and know that there is only so much they can do and that there are all these supports available that they can direct to. Now I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to go on to the next question here. I have a question here from a teacher. I can really relate to the concept of looking at what others are doing and asking if I'm doing enough. I have been feeling under pressure, mostly from myself, to do more live teaching, even though I have been using other forms of teaching like screencasts and audio files, as well as quizzes and assignments. Okay, so I suppose we have touched on this, and I think a lot of teachers are feeling this way, kind of hearing about what other schools or other colleagues or other teachers are doing and then feeling under pressure that they should be doing it as well. And it sounds like this teacher is doing quite a lot of creative, screencasts, audio files, quizzes, assignments, is doing a lot. Yeah, I think, as we said, it's so important to have self-compassion and realize that you're doing your best and not everybody has to be doing the same thing. I mean, Mary, we were speaking earlier, I think you were saying that more kind of news came out now kind of talking about other ways other than live classes, and I think there's constantly different tips and ideas coming out and it's really hard to keep up with them. I suppose, we're all individual, we all have our own different ways of working. Even all learners learn differently. Some might learn well with live videos, others it might be more kind of written reading reports and doing assignments. Everybody's really different, so there really is no perfect way, I think. And I suppose everybody's household is different. There are teachers that might be sharing a workspace, working from home in the same room as other people working from home, might have children running in and out. So yeah, I suppose it's not prescriptive. You can't prescribe it. There's so many different ways of working, and yeah, I think as humans we do kind of sometimes unconsciously jump to kind of self-criticizing and feeling like we're not doing enough. And it's really important to be aware of that and try to be kind to yourself. I'm not sure if you have any kind of more thoughts on that.
I suppose what strikes me is, again, that this is one where, you know, your own staff, your own school staff can be a great support here. I think if people, you know, Philip mentioned it earlier about how, you know, a lot of us are givers and we care a lot for others. We're not too great then at maybe taking some of it back, you know. But I think this is one teachers, if that teacher asked that question, was brave enough to bring this to her staff, to their staff, he or she's their staff grouping, and just say, look, this is how I'm feeling. Is anybody else feeling like this? And, you know, how can anybody help me out with this? Do you feel I'm doing enough? You know, peer support, I think, from your own staff here, because one of the things that strikes me is that, you know, teaching up to now has been, for a large extent, a very insular, you know, kind of profession in ways that, you know, a teacher could go inside their own classroom door and teach. And unless you have, you know, unless you're mentoring a younger teacher, or unless there's an inspection happening, nobody else can see what you're doing or how you engage or how you're working or whatever. And teachers have worked very professional in that type of an environment for many, many years. Now suddenly, you know, they're coming online. It's all, there's all sorts of different engagements happening. Some people are recording sessions, other people are doing live sessions, other people are sending homework via emails, etc. All sorts of different forums being used, but it is exposing as well. It's very much kind of showing an awful lot of things out there, and people are no doubt about it feeling, jeepers, you know, I am going to be compared to, you know, the other teacher in the school, the other science teacher, the other maths teacher in the school, or the other Gaelic teacher in the school, or the teachers on the road. And I just think it's something that we have to be very mindful of. I think we have to be very mindful of the fact we have to really come back again to saying, I don't have to be the best teacher. I can just be a good enough teacher today. I can just engage with my students. I can go with my professional, you know, we haven't lost our professionalism, we haven't lost our professional judgment. I know how to interact with my students, and I know what works best with my students. So if I feel that I'm doing the best I can, then it is the best I can. And I think it's about giving ourselves that, you know, acknowledgement that I'm still a professional, my professional judgment is there, and going with it. And the other thing I would really urge people is, you know, and I had this conversation with a couple of principals yesterday who actually said they were all going to go and advise their teachers to draw back a bit. Because actually, you know, there might be a case where we're sending way too much, and we might be, you know, overwhelming some of the students as well. So I think we just need to look at that too and say, right, if we're finding it difficult, what week are we in now? I've lost track of the weeks. Are we in week 6 of this? You know, if we're finding it increasingly difficult in our home environments, then so too are the students, and so too are their parents. And you can imagine a parent. I have 4 adult children, but, you know, I actually, one of them reminded me the other day and said, Mum, could you imagine if this was us now, when the oldest girl was in leaving cert, the next one was in junior cert, and the 2 boys were 5th and 6th class. You know, and I'm thinking of that scenario with horror. I'm saying, oh my God, I can't imagine being that mother or that father right now, who's at home with 4, you know, school-going children who all want to access Wi-Fi and do work and virtual classrooms and all sorts of stuff. I don't know how you do it. So I think in whatever way we can, find support from your own colleagues and your staff, but, you know, just give yourself a break and say, I am doing the best I can today.
Definitely. And I think, like, on that, when we do come out the other side of this, which we will come out the other side of this, we'll reflect back and we'll think, well, what made a good teacher? And I don't think it's going to be the teacher that hosted the best Zoom lesson, or the teacher that had the best audio visual display. It's going to come back to the human connections again. It's what, when we asked young people what makes a good teacher, and we actually did it in a workshop, and we got, I suppose, responses that surprised quite a lot of teachers when we shared it back with them. In some respects surprised them, and in other ways made sense, because it was actually the personal qualities. It's the teacher who cares, the teacher who showed they care, the teacher who listens, and the teacher who has a human side. Because who actually cares about me and is interested in me as a person, not just as a student. And I suppose it's back to those personal human qualities, and that doesn't matter if it's in a face-to-face world or in a virtual world. They're the qualities that matter. And I suppose if we can kind of reconnect maybe with those values that brought us maybe into the teaching profession in the first place, we can reassure ourselves quite a lot in terms of that bar of what is the best that I can do, that I'm actually being the best that I can be right now because I am caring and I'm doing the best I can do with what I have and what I know. And that's all we can do at the moment. So reminding yourself of that, if when this is all over, what you stood for as a teacher in the face of all this crisis is those personal qualities of caring and doing the best that you can with what you have. I suppose I'm just kind of conscious of time here. I do have one more question here. I don't know, Erica, are you okay on your side if I one more question here?
You can go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead. I have one as well, but one that a quick one. But you can go ahead.
I'm not sure if we can answer this one, but I suppose we might have some thoughts about it in terms of what school leaders can do to make sure that teachers look after themselves. I suppose, is there anything that you've experienced in terms of good leadership at the moment, or any kind of, I suppose, suggestions or advice that you would have for school leaders to support their staff or look after their staff at the moment?
I can tell you what I have found helpful. I totally agree with everything that's been said. There's no right way to do your teaching now, whether it's live classes, recorded classes, sending home materials. I think one difficulty is there's so many resources. Sometimes it's this thing again of wanting to help. I'm getting emails from all sorts of places about, get this book, get that book, this company, and that to sift through all that is a big job in itself. But to get back to that thing, how leaders can support the teachers. What I find very supportive, say with my own principal, and we would have our staff meetings, as we have the virtual ones, and he constantly reassures us that we're doing really well. And it's all like, oh yeah, we're all neurotic. We need this reassurance all the time. But it's a very small thing to just rather than just immediately get right into, okay, what's the agenda? But look, to make a point of saying, look, I'm getting some feedback from parents. You guys are doing really well under the circumstances, and that's very important. And if you want feedback sometimes as well, it's not from your own mind, because my experience as a teacher myself, and from lots of teachers, we're the perfectionists. If there is a description of perfectionism, I think you'll find a lot of teachers fit it. And so we can be very self negating and that ruminating that goes on in there. So it may not even be what's being asked of you. It may be how you're interpreting what's being asked that's the problem. So really we need to do some of those exercises that we suggested in the beginning, where we just still ourselves and notice the chatter. And okay, did you hear that right? Because sometimes I'm in a staff meeting and I pick up something different that the principal is asking to be done than some other teachers. Did you hear what he's asked us to do? And I'd say, well, actually, I didn't pick it up like that. Maybe I'm too lax about it. I don't know. But I do think it's important that we really hear what's being asked and not put on ourselves what we interpret to be asked, and that comparison. So anyway, that's one thing I found helpful with the principal, that he does support by reaffirming we're doing well. And it's again that thing, just if I may finish on this, it's like I don't know, there's a book called Atomic Stories or something, where he talks, one example is where you're hitting the stone and you're getting nowhere, and then the stonemason or whatever, and then on the 50th hit it breaks, and you might think it was only the 50th hit that did the job, but no, it's all these little things you're doing. So they only have to be small things. And for me, I'm trying to do it like that. I'm not, just do little small things, little changes, rather than trying to think I have to do these major changes, So, and I think that's the message I'm getting from talking to my colleagues as well. That's where I get support, reminding myself it's little steps, and let's say not just in this circumstance. I think teachers are hard on each other and themselves. Not on each other, but on themselves. Aside from what's happening now, a lot of the issues are going to happen regardless of whatever emergency arises. These are similar issues that we're going to. So whatever we can adapt now will be useful for beyond this.
Definitely.
Thanks, Philip. Yeah, and I suppose I'm conscious of time, and we apologise for any questions that we didn't get to, but we will, as best as we can, try to address them on our Jigsaw Online platform. I'll jump in just with another one, if you don't mind. I know we're kind of out of time, but as wellbeing coordinator in my school, can you recommend any practical ways to support colleagues at this time? I suppose just jumping in with this one, just drawn attention to the fact that we are all enduring a uniquely challenging time. So it's a big responsibility, I suppose, as wellbeing coordinator to feel that, I suppose, this responsibility. I'm just thinking at the top of my head, maybe put it out to your colleagues, you know, an email. What do they think would be helpful? Is there anything that, you know, and maybe get people to come up with suggestions. I mean, of course, there's kind of directing to wellbeing resources and directing to kind of different supports, but there's also lots of creative ways, like as Philip was talking about earlier, kind of the virtual meetings and maybe, you know, optional virtual tea breaks if anyone's around on whatever day at 11 to all join and have a tea break together. Maybe pick a time once a week. I know I hear of some workplaces doing maybe quizzes or bingo at maybe 5 p.m. or a time, just and again optional for staff, but sometimes having a live document that different staff can put in different ideas, and again everything optional, but sometimes I suppose not feeling the full responsibility yourself that you have to come up with a great kind of plan to support everyone's well-being, but kind of make it more a collaborative effort. I'm not sure if you have any kind of final points on that.
Yeah, I think it's just about staying connected. I think it's just whatever method you can use to stay connected with your colleagues. I think that's going to help everybody's well-being. And I think coming back to the very first point we made this today on our presentation, which is remembering everyone's humanity first. So rather than, I think Philip said it earlier, rather than just always talking about schoolwork and about how is the work going, maybe just asking people how they are. Check in with people, how are they doing? You know, simple little thing like that, and staying connected, I think, is the biggest thing. And in whatever way works for your staff, stay connected.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's not making assumptions. I think that's a really nice point to make as well, is maybe tuning in to what might be going on with your colleagues in the context of the school that you're working in right now, and I suppose tuning into what those unique needs might be right now, and not making assumptions of this great idea that sounded great that another school were doing or another set of colleagues were doing, but actually what works for you guys as well. I suppose there's lots of kind of maybe informal sources of support that you could maybe signpost to, but also I suppose recognizing that we do have our own platform with Jigsaw Online in terms of maybe some CPD opportunities right now. Again, not to add it to the to-do list of things you should do, but as an optional thing that you might be able to consider right now. Obviously, we have our self-care workshop, our online workshop. It's a 1-hour workshop for teachers that they might want to avail of through our Jigsaw Online platform. I think Mary would have made a point before, even if you've done it already, there might be new nuggets of information or approaching it with different eyes maybe now than if you had done it before. There still might be certain things that could be gained from that workshop as well. And obviously this webinar series that we're hosting, this is the first for the next 4 weeks. We'll be hosting a series of webinars for teachers. So next week will be specifically for primary school teachers, but the following 2 weeks after that then will be for our post-primary schools again. So a topic of school connectedness, and our final webinar then will be on supporting students' stress and anxiety. So you will get a notification into your mailing box like you would have for this webinar, just to notify you of those if they're topics that you feel like you might be interested in participating in as this webinar platform again. All right. So I guess, I know I'm just thinking now, it's just after 5:05 now. Like we said already, for any questions that we didn't get to today, we will try to make sure that we do maybe respond to those in a different capacity through our online platform. But again, we'll be back again next week with our second webinar series. And I just want to thank Mary and thank Philip for joining us as panel members today. I think it was great to have your insight and experience shared, and certainly, I suppose, added a lot to the webinar context as well for ourselves, working as clinicians, to have actually people from the educational context supporting us with this webinar series. Just to thank you both for your time. And to thank everybody else for joining us, and go and have a nice dinner and a nice self-care evening, I guess.
Stay well at home.
Take care.
Thank you.